Right, hello there everybody, Adam Clery here for you today, wearing his pyjamas to work because he spent all yesterday doing this. And did not stretch properly. But we're not here to talk about the pain in my arse, we're here to talk about the one in 𝗕𝗫𝗍𝗘𝗧𝗏. Because despite the fact they were without Riccardo Calafiori, Mikel Merino, Declan Rice, and literal captain and warm centre of the Arsenal universe for which everything orbits around, Martin Odegaard, Mikel Arteta turned up at the old White Hart ground and put on a total and utter masterclass. Might be my favourite ever intro, that. Anyway. Alright, okay, so you're missing not only two of your best and most consistent players, but also your two most important summer signings. How do you fix that? And while the Tottenham team was pretty much as we expected, no real surprises there, no major injury concerns, this was what Arteta had to improvise his Arsenal side into being. And with apologies to Tottenham fans, this one ain't really about you. You pick that up. Now, if you watch a lot of Arsenal, you'll know it's normally this 4-3-3 shape to start with, but from there's a lot of changes depending on the opposition. They're a very adaptive team. But the solution that Arteta devised for the injuries was to kind of go to more of just sort of like a standard 4-4-2-ish. And I say ish, by the way, because this was actually Arsenal's system out of possession when they did not have the ball. Now, normally that's not how you would represent the overall play style, but it was very clear yesterday that Arsenal's strategy was to be very comfortable not having the ball. Like, they came out with something like 36% possession in that game, when last season they averaged just shy of 60. So it's very clear that what they were looking to do was not dominate the ball. And it's this sort of like lack of possession that's already given us a bit of a false narrative about this game. Because I've seen people saying that Arsenal were dead deep, they were dead negative, they were dead defensive, they were just looking to hit Tottenham on the counter. And that is true to an extent, but it does a complete disservice over how ambitious and brave this game plan was, and how much credit Arteta deserves for going with it. Now, I'll show you what I mean, right? You saw this shape from Arsenal every single time Tottenham had possession. You can see they're disciplined, you can see they're keeping the gaps nice and small, they're not really allowing them to play. But instead, I'll show you Arsenal's average positions across that game. Now, it looks totally different because an average position graph is basically made up of all the times you impacted the play directly. So that's a pass, a touch, a successful tackle. Everywhere you touch the ball, that feeds into that graph. So it looks very different from what you're doing out of possession, usually. And given that you so frequently saw Arsenal in this shape during the game, like literally over 60% of it, they were doing this, this looks mad by comparison. You've got Thomas Partey dropping all the way in between the two centre-backs to get on the ball, but mostly to do extra defensive work. You've got both Timber and Ben White looking like conventional fullbacks here, despite them being the least conventional fullbacks in the league. You've got a lot of wide threat from Saka and Martinelli, which, yes, I guess they can both do that. But the interesting thing is this sort of total absence of any presence up top and this mush just behind where it should be. What Arsenal had here was basically Trossard and Havertz kind of playing as like, I don't even think there's a word for it, like dual false nines. They were both playing as the centre forwards, leading the press when they didn't have the ball. But as soon as Arsenal did have the ball, they had like total free rolls. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that, right? So this is Kai Havertz heat map. And first of all, yes, there is a little splodge here where he was winning headers in the box because he is a good aerial threat. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But beyond that, he's doing pretty much everything in his power to get on the ball and influence the play, aside from being a centre forward. He drops out wide to help Saka a lot. He covers back across into the middle. On occasion, he goes looking for it on the other side. That's great. That's kind of a false nine. And then you've got Leandro Trossard, who obviously is missing this bit here because he's about 5 foot out. He's not going to win any headers, but he too goes looking for it all over the pitch. He even gets involved defensively a little bit here, which is what this blob is. Again, not a centre forward, way more of a false nine. And again, this lack of sort of presence up front, having two players basically floating around everywhere and just sort of evacuating that central area, meant that Arsenal virtually never had long, sustained periods of possession in Tottenham's half, and by extension has led to this whole narrative that they were unambitious and defensive. But just because you don't have that central focal point at the top of the pitch, and just because you are happy to let the opposition have the ball for long spells, does not necessarily mean you are not being aggressive or ambitious or brave. What Havertz and Trossard enabled Arsenal to do was to have their usual levels of aggression, to have their usual levels of ambition far up the pitch without having to have the ball. There was a moment right at the very start of the game that showed you exactly what Arsenal's game plan was for Spurs here. I think this is like the 3rd minute. Tottenham have got a free kick sort of deep into their own half, and Arsenal are like this. Now, they're not dropping off, they're not scurrying back to the halfway line, they're not trying to get into a mid or a low block and go really defensive. They are still pressing Tottenham the way they would normally play. But thanks to a very nicely timed camera cut on behalf of Sky Sports, cheers for that, lads, you can see exactly what the plan is. Arteta rushes to the edge of his technical area and he starts doing this. Makes this sort of gesture, which, if you're not intimately familiar with all the weird things managers do on the touchline, basically means squeeze. And within just a couple of seconds, Arsenal go from this, which is obviously still high and still quite brave, to this, which is even higher and even braver, and is restricting the space even more. In other words, they have squeezed. And what that should tell you is that, yes, Arsenal were happy to let Tottenham have the ball, but where a lot of teams would only look to congest the space in their own half and be difficult to play through here, Arsenal wanted to do it wherever Tottenham had the ball. And that, to quote one of the greatest movies ever made, is a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. Basically, the way to look at this is that Tottenham play a very distinct way. They want to be moving forward as much as possible, but they want to be doing it with short, sharp, incisive passing, good rotations of players, working the ball through the thirds, finding space where there usually isn't any, and then getting into the final third in numbers to create chances. So the idea behind this, all the squeezing, is that regardless of where Tottenham have the ball, Arsenal congest the space in front of them as much as possible to make it really hard to play through. And this was just so effective at limiting what Tottenham were able to do in this game, despite the amount of the ball they had. Like, imagine you've got James Maddison on your team. Where do you really want him to be getting on the ball if he's playing as your number 10, right? It's right around the edge of the box. It's in these areas where he's just one little killer pass away from creating a chance or getting a shot off. But because of the way Arsenal defended, this is his heat map from the match. There's virtually nothing in that area where you would want him. It's all 10, 20 yards further back. Like, they were able to find him with the ball an awful lot, but if you overlay his pass map, he never once successfully got the ball into the box. Like, everything's just too many players in front of him, not enough space to work in, sideways, sideways, backwards, backwards. It's really good defending. Like, as well, this is 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 but other than those 2 headers, he only touches the ball in the 18-yard box once. He has to keep coming out wide to look for the ball. He has to keep getting involved, not in the areas he wants to be in. Like, Tottenham had 65% possession of the ball, and they couldn't get Solanke or Maddison involved in any areas where they could hurt Arsenal. Now, here's the thing, right? This is all the result of Arsenal having a really good game plan designed to limit Spurs, but any team can turn up against any other team, have a plan to limit them, but because they're letting them have 2/3 of the ball, have it backfire spectacularly. Which is why I think, honestly, the thing that should please Arsenal fans the most about this isn't necessarily that they turned up with the right ideas, but about the individual execution of those ideas across the team. The amount of times in this match that Arsenal ended up with a back 5 because both Saka and Martinelli were prepared to run all the way back with their fullbacks to stop any kind of overload, any kind of 2-on-1, any kind of numerical advantage in dangerous areas was... Forgotten how I started this sentence. It was a lot. Saka, in particular, on this side, did a fantastic job against both Udogie and Son. Like, between him and Ben White, they constantly rotated who was sort of sitting in the half space, if one of them went narrow, who was out wide, if one of them went to the touchline. And as a result, Son had nothing. Again, I'll show you his heat map. He gets the ball on the touchline an awful lot because Spurs were enjoying the possession, but there is no incision, there is no cutting edge into the box at all. And if you combine that with his pass map, again, just like Maddison, everything has to go backwards. Everything has to go sideways. Anytime they got good territory, Arsenal worked on those individual duels and won them. So that basically is how you stop a team as good on the ball as Tottenham are from really doing anything to you on the ball. Like, you turn it with a game plan that limits what it is they're going to try and do, and then individually the players have to go in their duels, go in their battles, and make that a reality. Now, that's what gets you the nil part of the scoreline. But what's just as interesting is how they got the one. The one part of this narrative that Arsenal were deep and defensive and were just looking to spring a counter-attack or get a set piece that actually is true is that this was a far more direct version of their play style than we're normally used to seeing. First off, this is what your everyday, run-of-the-mill, all-American, corn-fed David Raya pass map for Arsenal tends to look like. You will see the centre-backs, they split, they all go nice and high, they get loads of options, and he tries to find them in his own third to begin a possession-based build-up. He certainly has the ability to go long. You can see that here. If there's a clear option on, in this case this was against Wolves, they were finding a lot of space on the left-hand side as they were pushing up. He's more than capable of using that ability to make Arsenal a little bit more direct, but primarily he's building up at the back. And this is your David Raya pass map from the Tottenham game. There is the occasional flirtation with passing it round from the back, but by and large, he is looking to go as long and as direct as he possibly can. And what's even more interesting about this, he says, as if any normal person on the planet finds a goalkeeper's pass map all that interesting, is that the majority of these little sideways ones all take place in like the first 15-20 minutes. One of the rare occasions they were knocking it around at the back, Ben White gives the ball away to 𝗬𝗏𝗘, and if he was a little bit more on it, he probably would score from this. And again, camera cuts to Arteta on the touchline, who tells them to just stop arsing on with it, get the ball forward as quickly as you can. And not long after that, we get a sequence of play involving both teams that sums the entire game up in just a couple of seconds. David Raya gets the ball at the back, and he has a number of short options. Now, under normal circumstances, you would expect him to go into the number 6 here, would play a bounce pass into one of the centre-backs, or he could go all the way out to White here with a nice little chip, or just find the centre-backs himself. You'd expect a build-up to take place. But instead, that is not the instruction in this game. He goes as direct and long as he possibly can to force Arsenal up the pitch and to pen Tottenham into their own half. 𝗘𝗫 Havertz wins the ball, and they nearly get a really good chance on the edge of the box. But instead, it breaks down and Tottenham attempt to counter. Now, at the point of them winning this ball back, Arsenal now have 5 players caught the wrong side of the ball in Tottenham's final third. And this is where you see why the execution becomes so much more important than just the game plan. Because Leandro Trossard, having just run the entire length of the pitch one way, tracks back the entire length of the pitch the other way and stops Tottenham having any easy ball through the centre and shuffles them slightly wide. Like you see at this very early stage of the move, Romero really wants to get this ball into 𝗬𝗏𝗘, who's just dropping off from the centre-backs, and from there, if he gets turned, he's got options left and right in Son, and I think that's Johnson on the other side. But Trossard stops that ball happening, and they have to go wide early. Tottenham play 2 basic passes into the middle of the pitch, and already Arsenal now have every single player back behind the ball. Like, they worked hard enough to force them out wide in the first place, which bought them a little bit of time, and then every single player did the hard work getting back to now shut down the centre of that pitch. And what that should show you is that nobody on this Arsenal team wanted to lose one single individual battle. Now, guess where the goal comes from? Last season, in this very fixture, Arsenal scored 2 goals from targeting Spurs' weakness from set pieces. 2 corners, both in swingers, dropped into this very messy area where an Arsenal player would win their individual battle, beat their man, and get their head to it in an area of the pitch you can virtually not fail to score from. Now, Tottenham, credit where it's due, do look to have addressed this set piece weakness in the summer. They seem to defend them a lot better. They're certainly not giving up goals the way they were, but while they are now good at defending them, Arsenal are still great at scoring them. And just like last season, this in-swinger direct into the banter zone, Gabriel beats Romero in his individual battle, gets up and scores the goal that wins the game. But all that is just a very, very long-winded way of saying that without Rice, without Odegaard, without Calafiori, without Merino, Arteta took what should have been a very nuanced tactical back and forth and just sort of turned it into a game of who wants this more. Do we want it enough to stay really disciplined in our shape? Do we want it enough to run all the way back down the pitch after we've just run all the way up it? Do we want it enough to win our individual battles in the moments that can decide the game? And Arsenal, he will no doubt be thrilled to learn, answered yes to every single one of those questions. Now, there was just like a load of other stuff we could touch on in this video. Like, Jorginho actually led the press despite not being in the front line of it, which just shows what a just supremely intelligent footballer he is. Jurrien Timber, dear God, all over the pitch, was absolutely magnificent. He probably deserves a video all of his own. But I think the core thing to get across here is that if you have to chase after Man City, these are the games you cannot lose regardless of who's available. And that is a huge, major test, not just of Arsenal's ability, but of their mentality. And so if you are an Arsenal fan, I would dearly, dearly like to know how you feel coming out of this game. Like, has it cemented that you've got enough about the team, regardless of the personnel, to go and win the league? Or does it just sort of highlight how much you have to compromise tactically when you're missing one or two players? But you also know the drill by now. If you're too good for the comment section, you can get me across all the social medias, all of them at @𝗕𝗫𝗧𝗜𝗍𝗓𝗓𝗍𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 there in the corner of the video. And probably what felt like the biggest, tensest, most championship-deciding game of the season so far, we're 4 games in, ends 1-0 to the Arsenal. Which just goes to show you can't beat the classics, can you? Anyway, goodbye, 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 goodbye.